The story began in the deep, mist-shrouded green of the mountains, where a humble and honest mountaineer named Jeb lived a life of quiet endurance. For many long years, Jeb had struggled against the harsh realities of nature, barely finding enough sustenance to keep the hunger away from his small family. They lived in a modest cabin where the wind whistled through the timber, and every meal was a hard-won blessing from the surrounding woods. Then, on one fateful afternoon that seemed no different from any other, Jeb took his trusty rifle into the forest, hoping to bring home some food for the evening table. He sighted his target, pulled the trigger, and as the echo of the gunshot faded into the valleys, something extraordinary happened. The ground beneath his feet began to tremble slightly, and up through the dark mountain soil came a strange, thick bubble. It grew larger and darker until a heavy stream of black crude oil began to spout into the air. It was oil, that dark gold, that Texas tea, hidden beneath the rocky earth for centuries, waiting for Jeb to set it free. In the blink of an eye, before anyone could fully comprehend the magnitude of what had transpired, old Jeb found himself a millionaire, the owner of a vast fortune that changed their lives forever. The news of Jeb's sudden wealth spread like wildfire through the hills, reaching the ears of all his kinfolk. They gathered around the old cabin, marveling at the black liquid gold, and immediately began to offer their earnest advice. They looked at Jeb, their eyes wide with excitement, and told him that he must move away from the isolated mountains. They insisted that California was the magnificent place where he ought to be, a land of sunshine and endless promise. Without wasting any time, the family loaded up their old, trusty truck with all their earthly belongings, securing their wooden chairs, their pots, and their old trunks onto the flatbed. With a roar of the engine, they started their long journey across the country, moving away from the rugged ridges until they finally arrived in the legendary neighborhood of Beverly Hills. It was a wonderland of glistening swimming pools and dazzling movie stars, a world entirely foreign to the simple mountain folk. Upon their arrival at the grand mansion, they looked out at the rolling green lawns and welcomed their loyal old hound dog, calling out a warm howdy to Duke and Miss Duke, declaring with great joy that they were finally home to stay and would never be lonesome anymore. As they settled into the massive, echoing rooms of their new stone mansion, a sense of nostalgia mingled with their confusion about modern luxury. Standing in the middle of the grand hallway, Jeb turned to his young nephew, Jethro, who was looking around with a furrowed brow. Jethro sighed deeply and expressed his lingering doubts, stating that he still believed they ought not to have moved out of that comfortable bank building where they had stayed temporarily. Jeb, maintaining his calm mountain wisdom, looked at the boy and replied that what was done, and there was no use looking back at the past. Jethro shook his head, explaining that he was just getting his brand-new psychiatry business going remarkably well back there. He boasted that yesterday alone, he had successfully cured 5 mother-haters, guiding them with his unique logic back to a state of deep love and appreciation for their mothers. Jeb smiled gently, suggesting that perhaps Jethro could practice his wonderful psychiatry right here at home, where there would surely be plenty of family members needing his guidance. At that moment, the fierce and energetic matriarch of the family, Granny, announced that she was going to go right on with her own profession of dentistry. Jethro turned to her, wondering aloud which of the magnificent rooms she wanted him to put her heavy dentistry equipment in. Granny shook her head determinedly and told him that she would just let him bolt the heavy iron dentist chair directly down to the wooden bed of the truck. Jethro looked at her in surprise, asking if she truly figured on running a full dentistry practice right there on the back of the moving truck. Granny smiled confidently, asking why not, since everyone knew how much ordinary people absolutely hated to go to the dentist. She reasoned that, with this clever new arrangement, the dentist would go directly to the people instead. Jethro scratched his head, questioning whether the sophisticated folks of California were truly ready for such a thing as curb-service dentistry. Granny assured him that they were ready, willing, and anxious, explaining that as they were driving along the highway, the very minute the local folks caught sight of the iron dentist chair, their mouths just fell wide open in absolute amazement. Meanwhile, far away in the small, familiar town of Hooterville, a sweet young woman named Bobby Joe was sitting by the telephone in the local general store, her face filled with frustration. She looked up as her sister, Billy Jill, walked in and asked if she had managed to get any response. Bobby Joe sighed, stating that there was still no answer at the Glampitts residence. She muttered that she had been trying for 6 full days to call those people on the telephone line. She explained that she truly hated to just drop in on them unannounced, but if she did not get moving very soon, she was going to miss her important airplane connection to the grand city of Los Angeles. Sam Drucker, the wise and kindly owner of the general store, stepped forward from behind the counter and suggested that he could easily send a telegram for her instead. Bobby Joe brightened at the suggestion, saying that it was a fantastic idea. She instructed him to write that she had been trying to get in touch with them for quite some time, and that she had won a magnificent contest for selling the most soybeans in the county, and her grand prize was an exciting trip to Hollywood, where she would call them immediately upon her arrival. Sam nodded warmly, promising that he would take care of the entire matter for her. Bobby Joe smiled, expressing her deep gratitude to both Sam and Billy Jill for minding the store so carefully for her during her absence, promising to be back first thing on Monday morning. Billy Jill smiled back, telling her sister not to worry about a single thing because they would have the entire store perfectly cleaned up by the time she returned. Hearing the words "cleaned up," Sam Drucker looked over with a sudden look of suspicion, asking what exactly they meant by that. Billy Jill admitted sheepishly that she might have forgotten to mention they were planning a little party right here in the general store on Saturday night. Sam looked around the wooden counters, asking incredulously how many people they were planning to invite to this event. Billy Jill replied by asking how many players were on a regular football team, to which Sam answered that there were 11. Billy Jill then explained that there would be 11 fellas and 11 girls, making a total of 22 teenagers dancing in the aisles. Sam looked alarmed, but Billy Jill reassured him that they would keep a strict track of every single piece of food and refreshment they ate. Sam then inquired as to who was going to chaperone this wild teenage bash, and Billy Jill happily revealed that Uncle Joe would be watching over them. Sam rolled his eyes, stating that they could forget about worrying over the 22 teenagers, and instead they just needed to keep a very strict track of what Uncle Joe ate. Outside, the distant whistle of the train echoed through the hills, prompting Billy Jill to remind Sam that the Cannonball train was waiting for him, while the 8-ball of trouble was waiting for her at the store. Sam looked down at his suitcase, suddenly struck by a wave of nervousness, and announced that he had changed his mind and was simply not going on the trip. Bobby Joe pleaded with him, begging him to go and assuring him that he would have a wonderful time and that he would even get to see his sweetie again. Sam blushed, telling her not to start up with that talk about Granny, insisting that he and Granny were just old, ordinary friends. Bobby Joe laughed, comparing them to Romeo and Juliet, or Dick and Liz, or any of the great romantic couples of history, before pushing him toward the door so he would not miss his plane. Sam relented, telling her to just send the telegram as planned. Bobby Joe called out to the telephone operator, Sarah, explaining that Sam was sending a telegram instead, addressing it directly to Granny Clampett because she knew Granny would love hearing from her old friend Sam. The message was recorded, stating that he had been trying to get them for some time, was coming to Hollywood for his prize, and would call upon arrival, signed affectionately by Sam Drucker. Back in the grand mansion of Beverly Hills, Jethro and Jeb were struggling to carry a massive, incredibly heavy object through the wide hallways. Jethro groaned under the immense weight, stating that the thing had to weigh at least a ton, and Jeb agreed, noting that it was a real finger-curler of a load. He called out to Granny, asking exactly where she wanted them to place this heavy piece of equipment. Granny looked around the opulent surroundings, telling them not to look upstairs, but instead to take it right into the formal parlor and set it up directly in front of the elegant fireplace. Jeb stopped in his tracks, looking puzzled, and reminded her that the room was supposed to be a courting parlor, and it wouldn't look very romantic to have a cold, iron dentist chair sitting right in the center of the room. Granny dismissed his concerns with a wave of her hand, remarking sharply that with all the intense courting that had been going on in that parlor lately, they could have placed an electric chair in there and nobody would notice. Jeb defended the room, mentioning that their lovely daughter, Ellie Mae, might have some young gentleman callers arriving soon. Granny turned on him, asking when he was finally going to face the harsh truth that Ellie Mae was getting far too old to find a husband. Jeb shook his head, stating that he simply did not agree with her bleak assessment of the situation. Granny countered that naturally he would disagree because he was her doting father, but she reminded him of an old, wise saying that her own grandmother back in Tennessee used to repeat. She recited the rhythmic rhyme, stating that at 13 and 14, a girl is in her prime, at 15 and 16, she still has plenty of time, at 17 and 18, she is just about done, and by 19 and 20, her father definitely needs a gun. Having delivered her traditional lecture, Granny ordered Jethro to move the dentist chair into the parlor immediately, like a good little toad. Just as they were positioning the heavy iron chair, the telephone in the mansion rang loudly. Granny marched over and answered it, identifying herself to the person on the other end. The local operator informed her that a telegram had arrived and asked if Granny would like her to read it aloud over the line. Granny gasped in mock offense, telling the operator that shame should be upon her because a proper postman does not read other folks' private mail. She demanded that the operator get the telegram delivered up to the house quickly. The operator explained patiently that she would be glad to do so, but if Granny allowed her to read it now, she would receive the important message all the quicker. Granny relented, telling the operator to wait until she could sit down first, and then anxiously asked who had died. The operator assured her it was nothing terrible like that, explaining that the telegram was from a gentleman named Mr. Sam Drucker all the way from Hooterville. Upon hearing that name, Granny's entire demeanor changed, and she cried out with immense joy that Sam Drucker was her absolute sweetie. The operator congratulated her and proceeded to read the message, which stated that he had been trying to get in touch with her for some time. Granny interrupted with a proud smile, declaring that it was the absolute truth, and confided to the operator that Sam had actually proposed to her by mail once before, but she had always buried her true feelings in her letters. The operator continued reading, stating that Sam was coming to Hollywood for his grand prize. Granny gasped, calling him a bold rascal and wondering aloud if he was coming all this way just to carry her off into the sunset. She declared proudly that it would not be that easy for him, as he was going to have to court her properly first. The operator finished the message, noting that he would call upon his arrival. Granny laughed heartily, saying that it was a good joke on Sam because he didn't actually have an official arrival time yet, and she certainly wasn't going to tell him when to come. She stated that her life motto was always to keep the men guessing, because once a man gets to thinking he is the only rooster in the hen house, a woman is in deep trouble. She began to share another old saying from her grandmother back in Tennessee about how men are exactly like mules, but the operator hung up the phone, leaving Granny to chuckle that the poor girl must have already heard that particular piece of wisdom. Inside the parlor, Jeb was still looking at the heavy dentist chair with disapproval, asking Granny how she liked the arrangement. Granny snapped at him, telling him to get that horrible iron thing out of the room immediately because this was now strictly a grand courting parlor. Jeb reminded her that she had just said Ellie Mae was too old for courting, but Granny interrupted him, asking who was talking about that young child anyway. She announced with great excitement that there was going to be some serious, grown-up courting happening in this very room because Sam Drucker himself was coming to town. Jeb smiled knowingly, saying that he saw what was happening, and Granny added that Sam certainly wasn't coming all this way just to see an old movie star like Mae Bush. Jeb then brought up the previous saying about her grandmother's view on age, but Granny quickly reminded him that her grandfather had another excellent saying, which was that old violins always make the absolute sweetest music. Jeb nodded, adding that of course, one must have the right bow to play it properly. He complimented her on the witty saying and Granny smiled, remarking that it wasn't too witty, but it certainly beat the usual wild exclamations. Meanwhile, out in the kitchen, Ellie Mae was busy preparing food over a massive open flame. Jeb walked in and looked at her with concern, telling her that she did not to be playing with fire in that dangerous way. Ellie Mae looked up cheerfully, explaining that she wasn't playing but was actually cooking with it. Jeb noted that cooking was precisely when fire was at its most dangerous. He observed her actions as she struggled with a heavy iron tool, asking if she was actually taking her food out of the hot oil with his heavy crowbar. Ellie Mae smiled and confirmed that she was indeed using it, explaining that the regular metal kitchen fork just was not stout enough for the heavy lifting required for this particular meal. Jeb looked at the thick, heavy pastries she had made, commenting that her donuts certainly did have a lot of dense body to them. Ellie Mae handed him one proudly, thanking him and telling him to go ahead and eat it right away. Jeb hesitated, holding the heavy pastry, and told her that he would kind of like to have a hot cup of coffee to go with his donut. Ellie Mae beamed, saying that she already knew that, which was why she had made him some special coffee to go with it. Jeb looked at the dark liquid, then politely suggested that he would actually prefer to have his coffee and donut after they had finished their main meal. Ellie Mae clapped her hands happily, telling her father that she had anticipated that as well, which was why she had baked him one of her famous surprise loaves of bread. Jeb looked worried, asking if she really had, and Ellie Mae invited him to come over to the oven to help her lift the massive loaf out. Jeb complied, but asked with concern if Granny was going to get her nose out of joint with Ellie Mae taking over the entire kitchen in this manner. Ellie Mae assured him that Granny wouldn't mind at all, because it was precisely on account of Granny getting married to Sam Drucker that she was taking over the cooking duties. Jeb looked surprised, asking if Granny had actually told her that they were getting married. Ellie Mae confirmed it, saying that Granny had stated Mr. Drucker was coming to town specifically to claim his pride. Jeb shook his head gently, noting that everyone knew how Granny was likely to get carried away with her own romantic ideas. Ellie Mae agreed, adding happily that Sam was going to carry Granny clean back to Hootenville. At that moment, Jethro entered the kitchen, calling out that Granny wanted Ellie Mae to come upstairs immediately to help lace up her tight corset. Ellie Mae nodded and hurried out of the room to help her grandmother. Left alone with his nephew, Jeb looked at Jethro with a serious expression, pointing out that if Granny actually married Sam Drucker and he carried her off to Hooterville, the two of them were surely going to starve to death in this big mansion. Jethro looked terrified, agreeing that starvation was a terrible way to go. Jeb pointed toward the counter, reminding Jethro that Ellie Mae had cooked some food, but Jethro shivered, replying that eating Ellie's heavy cooking was an even worse way to die. Jeb calmed him down, advising that they should not commence swimming until they actually hit the water. He pointed out that Sam Drucker had not even arrived in Beverly Hills yet, and they did not know for certain that he was actually going to propose marriage when he got there. Jethro insisted that this time Sam meant serious business, because Granny had told him that Sam was even ready to take on any romantic rival who stood in his way. Jeb laughed, stating that Sam didn't actually have any rival in town, but Jethro noted that Sam certainly believed he had won. Suddenly, the telephone rang again, and Jeb answered it, recognizing the voice of a local acquaintance named Ed Claimer. Ed greeted Jeb and asked how everyone was doing, mentioning that a popular young Hollywood actor named Dash Riprock had just gotten a brand new sports car and wanted to come over to take Ellie Mae for an exciting drive through the hills. Jeb thought that sounded like a dandy idea and told Ed to have Dash come right on by the house. He hung up the phone and told Jethro the good news, saying he would go upstairs to tell Ellie Mae about her upcoming date. Jethro volunteered to go instead, explaining that he wanted to see Dash and his spectacular new car anyway, though Jeb warned him that he didn't want Jethro trying to borrow the expensive vehicle. Jethro promised he wouldn't, and ran off excitedly. A short time later, the front door opened, and Miss Jane Hathaway, the efficient secretary from the local bank, walked in alongside Sam Drucker, who was holding his suitcase and looking around in awe. Jethro greeted them warmly, and Miss Jane explained that she had happened to run into Mr. Drucker at the airport and had rushed him right out to the mansion in her car. She said goodbye, wishing them a wonderful visit, and Sam thanked her profusely for her immense kindness. Sam turned to Jeb, apologizing for barging in so suddenly, but explaining that Mr. Clampett had always told him that if he ever came to town, the family would take it quite poorly if he did not stay right there with them. Jeb welcomed him warmly, assuring him that they had plenty of extra room in the grand house. Jethro leaned in close to Sam, whispering a warning that he shouldn't expect to see too much of Granny during his stay. Sam looked confused, asking how that could be. Jeb invited Sam to sit down and make himself comfortable, while Jethro went on to explain that the spirited little woman was gone out of the house all the time, running from one exciting date right after another because the local men simply would not leave her alone. Sam gasped in disbelief, asking if he was truly talking about Granny. Jethro nodded solemnly, stating that the locals now called her the Beverly Hills Butterfly, and she was the latest obsession of the big movie stars. Sam was stunned, asking if movie stars were truly taking her out on dates. Jethro confirmed that they took her out and kept her out until the early hours of the morning, revealing that she had only pulled up to the driveway at 10:30 that very morning. Sam anxiously demanded to know who she had been out with, and Jethro, pretending to protect identities, said he didn't want to name any names, but there were 4 wealthy people in the party, including a well-known Hollywood playboy who was driving, a beautiful blonde sitting next to him, a millionaire sugar daddy, and Granny herself. Sam was deeply shocked, asking if this wild lifestyle went on all the time, and Jethro answered that she only ever came home to change her fashionable clothes and her handsome fellas. Sam shook his head, mentioning that the whole family seemed to be gone a lot, since he had tried to call the house for pretty near a whole week without an answer. Jeb explained that they had all been out frantically looking for Granny. He noted that if it weren't for their loyal old hound dog Duke, they would have never found her at all. He described how they would simply have the dog sniff one of Granny's fancy dancing slippers, and the intense chase would be on, taking them up and down the famous Sunset Strip and all over the vast city. Jeb pointed to the sleeping dog, showing Sam how completely worn out the poor animal was from the constant tracking. Sam could hardly believe his ears, staring at the hound in utter amazement. Jethro then looked out the large front window and announced that one of Granny's premier fellas was arriving at that very moment, pointing to a magnificent, large car coming through the front iron gates. He identified the driver as the old die-hard suitor, Dash Riprock. Sam's eyes widened as he repeated the famous name,